I call this meeting of the Northeast Independent School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of board members is present, that this meeting has been duly called, and that notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. 2, board training. That would be Dr. Gibson. As you all remember, a few weeks ago, Dr. Gibson came and led us through some preliminary board training exercises, and now we're going to continue that with the discussion from last time. So, Dr. Gibson, the floor is yours for as long as you need it.
Thank you, sir. I'll again try to be brief, be bright, and be gone. I think that's the best rule of thumb for board meetings, and I harken back to thinking about my father again. You know, when I became a superintendent, he was a board president, you know, telling me that when trustees first become trustees, it is like drinking from a fire hose. And so just remember that. So we'll do a little bit of rewind tonight and maybe give you all a chance to talk or ask questions about some of the previous materials. And then there's 2 things tonight cascading from the previous meeting to go a little bit deeper. And I felt like it was prudent to not go deeper into those, you know, on that first night. And President Byer, with your permission, I'm going to monitor my phone. My 3rd grandchild is being born right now
Congratulations.
as I stand here, and so everything appears to be going fine.
Good.
She seems to be a pro at this, so anyway.
Well, I also want to mention before you go, I said you had the floor, but I think I lied. We do have a couple of board members not present. They are monitoring our meeting, so I may get emails.
Great.
Occasionally if they have questions. So I will let you know if that happens. So just giving you a heads up.
No, perfect. And in general terms, I would like all the trustees, I mean, the first time was kind of like, just laid it all out, the breadth and the depth of it. And tonight, I would appreciate, you know, any time, just stop and just let's ask a question and let's probe a little bit deeper, if that's all right with everyone. I will purposefully do that on 2 things in just a moment. And so again, I'm going to just dive in because time is precious, and I want to honor your time, and I want to get us to a place here in just a little bit that we just stop for a little bit and have a conversation. And so again, some of this is the same slides up until here in just a moment, but just anchoring back to in the absence of a systems approach, you know, we have a tendency to blame people, and it doesn't mean that there are not some problems that are people problems, but in the absence of thinking about this, and you know, the rule I stick in my mind is this 85% rule from Deming. You know, if I'm hearing something as a superintendent, is it a people problem or is it a system problem? You know, like I want to start peeling that back immediately. So we have to think about the district as, especially one this size, as a very complicated, complex system. Dr. Meiker, is it fair to say that the shortest line between point A and point B in a school system is never a straight line? Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely.
Okay. And that's probably true in almost any organization, but particularly, I think, in education.
Yeah, Dr. Gibson, during my studies, I studied organizations very in depth. And the larger they become, the more complex they become.
Right.
And that's just what happens.
And you know, I was in a district last week that had 300 students, and, you know, they can pull a lever and pretty much know all the ripples. Right. I mean, just in one room with 5 administrators or 3 administrators and 5 board members, you could kind of predict the ripples, right? In an organization as large and complex as yours, that's the game. Is like, okay, we pull this lever, like where do the ripples go? You know, and then we have to monitor. And I always, you know, felt like we don't want to send out another set of ripples when the first ripples are just now coming back, right? Like, let's try not to do another thing that sends another set of ripples out. A part of what's unique here, even though this is in some ways orientation, this information, you guys, I'm just going to say it, y'all already have a scorecard. So you already have a system that's going, And then we're orienting some of the newer trustees, but then all of us collectively as a team, because if you remember, when one member changes, every group dynamics go back to zero. So we've got the new we, I think we talked about, what, you know, what does that look like, and what do we want that new we to be? But just, I want you to feel comfortable, and I want you to be proud of the fact that you already have an existing scorecard that aligns to what we believe are the tenets of good, highly functioning schools right now. You all, now I'm looking at Miss Caldwell, you know, in this very room, she was a facilitator the night that we settled on student, staff, stakeholder stewardship. And it's funny, when I show this slide now, I don't even say what the words that are on there. I just say steward, or I just say student, staff, stakeholder, and stewardship. And then everybody goes, oh, okay, I get it. So I use y'all's terminology at least twice a week. You all did not take, but you looked at, you reviewed the good governance inventory, and I think we agreed that we're going to take it sometime during this next year. But just as a reminder, it anchors on 6 concepts: belief, mission, and vision, systems and processes, progress and accountability, advocacy and engagement, synergy and teamwork. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about synergy and teamwork, and then also financial stewardship. And I apologize that we sent this around between my phone and computers, and I think some of the formatting's off. All right. In your packet, we talked the last time briefly about the mindset. So now I want to talk a little bit about systems framework. And Peggy, they have this same packet. Thank you. I assumed as much. So in your packet, you have this graphic that some of the trustees have seen numerous times, but it's arrows that are going different directions. And then there's a corresponding document that's the 4 stages. And I just want to orient you to this for just a little bit. And with Dr. Micah and I talking about, you know, the complexity of a district this size, this in any size organization is a challenge to try to move from stage 1 to stage 2, from stage 2 to 3, and from 3 to 4. That's a challenge in any organization. It's just inherently a greater challenge the larger the organization becomes. And so, again, the last time I was here, we talked about mindset. Tonight, we're really talking about system. And then we're going to get to the strategy execution tool at the end of tonight, which is the balanced scorecard, your primary tool. But the corresponding document, the 4 stages, I just want to point out, on the 1-pager with the arrows, there's a statement at the end of it: work is characterized by activities rather than processes. So if you look at stage 1 on the second document, the chart, it goes into a little more detail and explanation about processes and operations, and then results, outputs, and outcomes. Does that make sense? A little greater description of stage 1 versus stage 2 versus stage 3 versus stage 4. I want to pause just a little bit. Does that make sense? And Dr. Micah, I might pick on you for just a second, and just, like, in your mind, when you think about stage 1 to stage 2 or stage 2 to stage 3, you know, and we're thinking about these arrows aligning, like what comes to your mind when you're thinking about arrows aligning?
So one of the things that I've been talking a lot about, Dr. Gibson, with my staff, and they'll remember this, is oftentimes we talk about communication,
Yep.
right? And I've been pushing on them because I'm going to say it's not communication. It's actually comprehension. Because I think in today's world, we have so much communication that comes in, and we've said we've either pushed it out through an email or a video or this or that. The question becomes, did you comprehend what it said? Because if I'm going to try to align things, we all need to understand what we're all talking about and trying to get to in order to show how all of our work fits together to go down that path.
Yeah, and that's a really good thought. And again, we don't rehearse these. I like just keeping him on his toes, and he likes to do the same. And so when you're saying that, Dr. Micah, I'm thinking about the difference between one-way communication and two-way communication, right? Because we're pretty decent these days, especially post-pandemic, at one-way communication. We had to get good at it, right? We're having school today, we're not having school today. Today's asynchronous for 30 minutes and then, like we had to do all the things. But coming out of the pandemic, and I love what you're saying about comprehension, we're kind of redesigning schools. And it has to be about listening, to that front line and building systems for
Yeah,
that.
it's that piece of, am I talking at you or with you?
That's correct.
That's it. And I think, to your point, Dr. Gibson, we spend a lot of time talking at people, and now we got to talk with them.
That's right, and you need both, but I think sometimes leaders get focused on just the one way, right, and not the two way. Ms. Thompson?
As we walk through these 4 stages, if you can think about examples of each of them as you go through them, I would love to hear some of
No,
those.
we'll just do that right now. I think it's good, because you can read, and I'm not going to read to you. So
Okay.
you see, so in my mind, when I look at the arrows, this doesn't make it right, but like just my initial glance is one of those arrows is the board team, and the other arrows are the different departments that these individuals lead. That's one way to look at it. Not saying it's the way. One of the benefits for the scorecard, back to this common vision, is what Anthony's looking at on the scorecard when he's the expert, and like he's going into priority 1 layers deep. But Rudy's sitting there hearing that, Deb's sitting there hearing that, because the last thing we want is him trying to explain to his own colleagues the importance of something financially, or Deb saying, hold on, that sounds simple, but out in the community, this is going to happen, right? So that's what I see, if that makes sense. So, and that starts up at the top. And I would put the governance team as one of those arrows. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, like how do we get harmony? You're in 2 separate roles. This team, I'm just going to be concrete tonight. This team and this team are in 2 separate roles. And so if we don't have harmony between these 2 roles, I'm just going to tell you they're going to bump into each other. And when I say bump in, I don't mean that in a positive way, right? And I'm glad, thank you, Ms. Thompson, because I'm glad we're getting to this right off the bat. This is really about how do we get harmony between the strategic role and the tactical role. That's like one of the first fundamental pieces to me, because that has to be first, then they can start getting harmony between the different departments. Dr. Micah, how many campuses do you have?
68, but
Okay.
then you got to add in some other things. So
All right, so I could put
we have
70.
458 buildings, 240 portables, just north of 12 million
Okay, so
square
if you
feet.
said 400 and some odd buildings, I could make a case that you should have 400 arrows on your, right? Like every one of those buildings, do they know why we showed up today? Is it only what's happening in that building, or is this bigger overarching target out there that we're trying to accomplish?
Right, it's how do we all interact together towards the same outcome?
That's correct.
That's it.
And I'm just going to go ahead and say something I was going to say later in it, but thank you for the question. The ceiling, the ceiling on how far Northeast Independent School District will be able to progress in these stages is sitting in this room. The ceiling. So if we don't get stage 4 between, and it's not just these, they've got some direct reports that I would argue are part of that tactical, but you, as trustees, we can't expect in this room for the district to operate at a stage 4 when these 2 tactical and strategic teams are at a stage 1. It's just, I'm just telling you, it just doesn't work. Like, we can try and try and try. We have to model and lay the groundwork for it to cascade to the next tier. And I have superintendents all the time that say, I just can't get the board on board, we're going to do it anyway. And I'm just going to tell you, the thought bubble in my head is you'll last about a year. And I try to keep a good face on, because this harmony between these two teams is this progression. That's why I wanted to share the stages. Okay, let me pause and thank you for, is that a good example? Right, and I, in the absence of a board-adopted strategic direction, I'm just going to call that. Your particular model is a scorecard, and I personally think that's one of the best ways. So how do we get all 400 arrows, understanding that those aren't the targets of the board? That's all of our targets. I know it's a cheesy story, but I've probably told it in here. But 3 custodians at NASA. During the 1970s, NASA's trying to get someone landed on the moon. Time magazine shows up and interviews 3 custodians, and the first one, what's your job here? And he says, I clean up after all these slobs. Okay, not a very good answer, so let's go find another custodian. Second custodian, I clean up after the engineers so they can do their job better. Okay, much better answer, but they went to the third one. Same question, what's your job here? And the third custodian said, I'm putting a man on the moon. Right, custodian. And I know that's a little naive and all that, but that's the picture I have in my mind, all the way to the front line in one of those 400 buildings. We want them to see this target of these strategic objectives, and that's what we're trying to do. And I'm teaching kids, so maybe my biggest part is in priority 1, but I also heard that we've got to save electricity, so I'm going to flip the light out, because that's one of our initiatives in priority 4. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Gibson, if I may, I'll give you all a real example, because your question was, can you give us some examples? I'll give you one here. All right? Bill Harrison, who is our Executive Director of Transportation, right? So one day I said to Bill, what do you do? And Bill's answer was, we get to kids on time so that great learning can happen. He gets it.
That's it.
We get to kids, it's about on-time arrivals so kids can learn. He gets that it's not just about kids on a bus and getting them there. It's we have a job to do so that someone else can do the other work, right? He sees the interconnected. This is what my team, Deb's been a part of it, now changing a little bit in it, but this is what those 2 over there have been working so hard, and the other folks, about showing how we're all working towards the same outcomes. And even though something in that scorecard sounds just like Anthony's world, well, Rudy has to understand that, because if his administration doesn't grasp that, and the administrators he's supervising, that work doesn't happen. And then they can't get the great instruction going if kids are late every day, because now we're losing instructional time. So what we talk a lot about, and it's really at Cabinet where a lot of it happens, is about how we're interconnected and how we're all working towards that same outcome because we all need to know that's the important work. We're all doing a million things. Every one of their direct reports and those reports underneath them have a million jobs they got to do. But in the end of the day, this is what matters.
That's right.
Right here. This is where, and oftentimes, and I'll pick on poor Mr. Jarrett, because he'll go to something and he'll come back and he's excited about something, and I'll say, Mr. Jarrett, I like it. Where does it fit on the scorecard? Because what I'm asking him to do is, that's great, and I think it's awesome, but show me where it fits, because if it doesn't fit in there, not saying it's not, but it's not the most important stuff. Because our energy needs to be spent there, because that's what, not this board, but the board set, our community, our students, and our parents agreed to. And they said, yep, this is the work. And that's how it works. Now, have we cascaded it all the way down? No. For a variety of reasons, but that's ultimately.
Are you ready to cascade, Dr. Mike?
I want to.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
That's. I just want to make sure.
We want to get there. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. Is when we're doing campus instructional plans, it should look like this. That's the goal.
And that was the initial goal, and I'll just say it, and it hit a roadblock. And now we're back to get it back on track. Cascaded scorecards is the ultimate goal here. And I know we're having a board conversation, but again, you said, is it fair or is it understandable what I'm saying? Like, you can't say, Dr. Micah, go cascade scorecards on team unless we've got this first tier shored up, right? And not here, but in some districts, you know, data can be weaponized at the dais. And so, and if you're trying to, if you remember, we talked about a continuous improvement mindset the last time. If you're trying to have a true, robust continuous improvement mindset, we have to be able to call any number out, whether we like it or whether we don't like it. We have to put it up there and say, there's the number, and we want it to be 10 percentage points higher. And that's back to the team trust, right? Like, we've got to have trust that we're going to just look at the number and try to continuously improve. Yes, sir.
So we really don't rehearse this, but I've been looking a lot, of course, at accountability and stuff. And one of the discussions I got into, and what I've been thinking through with my staff and some others, is how did we get here? And to your point, Dr. Gibson, what I would argue with accountability is there's nothing wrong with it. We all have to be accountable to someone or something. But it's all about how that data is utilized. Because my saying that I've used for years, so just so you all know, when I first became superintendent, we did a district support services survey, which was the campuses rating how the services were over here. All right? And I can tell you that when I first rolled that out, there were a lot of people who weren't happy. All right? And then we got our scores in, and I'm going to be honest with you, some were really good and some weren't so good. And how I approached it was going to determine how it was received. And what I said, and you all were here, the data will be used as a flashlight, not a hammer. Now, I could say it all I wanted, but I had to exhibit that. And no matter who, because you had some that I could have hammered, so did you, but we never hammered. We used it to shine a light on the great things we were doing, and hey, we have some opportunities to get better. But it was all through this collaborative piece of we've got to work together to get us there, because what we've all been working on is if Rudy, one of his campuses fails, then Anthony's failed, then Deb has failed. We've all failed somehow because something fell through. It's nobody's, I don't want to point and blame him. We all did it. Would that be fair, Dr. Gibson?
Absolutely.
Do you got a baby yet?
No.
Okay, I was just
Thank you
wondering.
for checking
I
out.
saw you reading it, so I thought maybe we had an update.
There's details I don't need to share publicly, but anyway, it's on its way. There's evidence to support it's on its way. We'll just leave it, yeah, we'll leave it there. Thank you. That was a really good example, and Dr. Micah, I'm going to go back to, and you know, Deb, I can't help but think about at the start of this process, and I apologize for calling you out right like tonight, but you know, we're out in the community listening and learning, and I would assume a large percent of your students are transportation students, going back to that 50% or lower than that, or 30, 20, what?
It's around, it's a little less than half, but
Okay,
it's
so
pretty
let's
big.
Yeah, with as many students as you have, think about that many, and who's the first person that they see as a representative of Northeast ISD every morning? First person. The tone of the day may be set right there, right? Is that fair? And it's a big challenge. I mean, I drove a bus my first year, and I thought, piece of cake. It was a third of my salary, $20,000 salary. You know, I made $25,000 that year because I drove a bus. And I just thought, this is like shooting ducks on a pond. And I just was in cold sweat the first, because like, I'm about to load this up with 72, and it's a rural district, so it's kindergartners through 12th graders, right? I'm about to load this thing up with 70 kids from 5 years old to 18 years old. Like, I literally could, some of the kids I was hauling grew a fuller beard than me, and 5-year-olds that the moms came out at 6 a.m. and handed them to me asleep. I dressed them in town, like, and had their Pop-Tart ready for them. But I realized, like, man, this is, like, they're in our care the moment I roll up on this thing. They're in the Graham ISD care. Okay, good enough on the stages. And I really wanted to park there, and thank you, Dr. Micah, for adding some value to that, and thank you for the question, Ms. Thompson, because is it fair? I'm going to make an assumption here. You all want this district to be a stage 4 district. Fair enough? And, you know, we worked hard at this for 12 years in a neighboring district, you know, and I would still say, we're 3.5, you know, and at my retirement, they made me a t-shirt, we are stage 4, you know, and I still said, 3.8, you know, because it's continuous improvement. You can always see a little bit. But Ms. Thompson, do you mind, and then if we'll come around, just that, I'll tell you what, let's look at the arrows just to hear it out loud. So stage 1, the written description that starts with work is, do you mind reading that? This is stage 1.
Work is characterized by activities rather than by processes, and they are largely responsive to immediate needs or problems. Goals are poorly defined.
Okay. I'm going to pause there for just a second. That last part of it, because of that scorecard, no matter how much cascading has occurred or not, that document almost gets you out of stage 1 if it does not get you out of stage 1. Is that fair enough? Like, just having that adopted is like the pass out of stage 1. Ma'am, do you mind? Otika said your name to me today. Chiji, right?
Chiji.
Okay, she said make sure to say it right. I guess she was watching that.
Terry
Will
is-
you do the same for stage 2,
Sure.
please?
The organization is beginning to carry out repeatable processes, evaluation, and improvement, and there is some coordination among organizational units. Strategy and quantitative goals are being defined.
And so what all trustees, what's different between 2 and 1? Like, what are just the key word? What's a key word in
Repeatable processes.
repeatable?
And I think the goals being poorly defined to they're being defined.
Right, and see, that's why I think with the scorecard, you can't say that you're in 1 because they are defined. Now, we're trying to get re-anchored to them, fair enough, and the end of tonight is to like really anchor to those, Dr. Micah, right? Like, we're gonna come back and we're gonna anchor back and let everybody talk about them. Ms. Villarreal, do you mind stage 3 if you don't mind?
Processes are characterized by repeatable steps that are regularly evaluated for improvement. Learnings are shared, and there is a coordination among organizational units. Processes address the key strategies and goals.
And Dr. Micah, you said something earlier that made me think about that process is full alignment to strategy and goals, right? Like, and so I think you've got a picture in your mind of this 2 to 3 jump. Is that a fair statement? Because I heard something you said a while ago made me think that's stage 3.
Yeah, and we had this discussion as a cabinet. I want to say it was maybe April or May of last year, where we talked about these aligned. I brought this in actually to work with them, and I asked them, where did we think we were?
I think that's great.
Because it was interesting to hear people's perspectives and then to talk about, well, what would it take to get
That's it.
where we need to be? Because I can want it all I want, but ultimately they're going to have to help get us there. And
that's perfect. To me, one of the biggest tools between 2 and 3 is the cascade of the scorecard. Like that, and by the way, that's huge. That's huge with a district that has 5 campuses, right? So this is a big lift. Again, I'm repeating myself, but to ask the tactical team to go undertake that big lift when there's not harmony right here is a bridge too far.
Right.
I'm just going to say it that way. It's just a bridge too far if there's not harmony right here. Ms. Cox, you have been tasked with the longest one. Do you accept that challenge?
I accept.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
But pardon my scratchy voice. Processes are characterized by repeatable steps that are regularly evaluated for change and improvement in collaboration with other affected units. The organization seeks and achieves efficiencies across units through analysis, innovation, and the sharing of information and knowledge. Processes and measures track progress on key strategic and sustainable goals.
Well done, thank you, ma'am.
Thank
Any trustee, what do you see in 4 that's not in 3? Again, just keywords. What's in 4 that's not in 3?
Track progress.
You're just tracking it, which to me connotes 3-year trend lines. You know, we've been at it for a while. We've got trend lines. Yes, ma'am.
Measures? Oh.
Measures.
Sustainable goals.
Sustainable. So we don't just have them. We're constantly making sure that they're viable, that they're the right goal at the right place at the right time. What else? Ms.
I
Tom-
see innovation
Innovation, that's right.
and analysis.
We're assuming that those things are always in existence, but innovation towards this real well-defined targeted outcome is different than just innovation for the sake of innovation. You said it earlier, where does it fit? I'm convinced creativity is way overrated, except for novelists and movie directors. There's a best practice out there somewhere that we just haven't found yet. But we have to get zeroed in on what we're trying to work on, then we go find the best practice. And then it's like, oh, and it may not be a school, by the way. It may be a hospital, it may be a bank, depending on, not teaching kids, but, you know, on some of the other things. Ms. Thompson, did you have something? If not, I'm just warning you, you have a hot mic.
Oh,
Okay. Just try and take care, new trustee.
So I
Yes, sir.
did want to ask Dr. Micah to his statement a minute ago that where from sort of the tactical role do we see ourselves from that discussion that you had?
On 1 through 4?
Yeah.
About a 2.8, 2.9
Oh,
is where
okay.
we landed ourselves. That's where we landed, is we felt pretty good that we were right in there. I'm looking at them to make sure, like I'm not dreaming this, right? Like, isn't that where we landed? Somewhere between 2.8 and 2.9. But what we talked a lot about was what it was going to take to get us to 3.
And that's the
And to your point, Dr. Gibson, it takes a lot of
Yes.
energy and time and conversations and follow-up and monitoring and to really get it to that. Pardon me? No, I was saying discussion. Yeah. Like, it just takes a lot. Like, I felt like once we got our scorecard in place, we rapidly accelerated up.
Yeah, you jumped 1 to 2.
Like we jumped in. There was a lot of this momentum. I've talked a lot about change this year. You all came and listened to it, but you know we've to Kurt Lewin's piece of we've kind of refrozen in a sense, and we have to unfreeze again in order to get up because again it's such a big lift. It's tiring, and you got to be careful you don't push too hard that you burn your people out in the process.
And my opinion is the journey from 2 to 3 is the toughest journey. That's the long haul.
Yeah. Well, and I think some of it also, we've talked in the past that I don't know that you can make that jump without understanding what it is that's coming back to you. So you start almost getting into some of the tracking the measures a little bit.
That's correct.
In order to make that leap, because you don't know what to do if you don't know what's working and what's not working.
And I'm just going to tell you at the end of tonight, and not that far from now, I mean, the question's going to be with respect to measures between the strategic role and the tactical role. What does the strategic role want? And we had that conversation one time before, but it's the new we, fair, Mr. Byer, right? And because I'm pretty sure Dr. Micah he's okay with whatever it is that the board says is the right cadence. Is that a fair statement? The right amount that the board wants? I know he's asked it before. Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
Now it's hot because actually pushed. For
Okay.
real. So one of the things that Dr. Micah just said was that they evaluated it and gave themselves a 2.8 based on lots of conversations and thought. But we can't discuss things without it being an open meeting. So how do we have these robust, great discussions without violating the law?
Well, there is a way, and we're going to talk about that at the end of tonight. So thank you for teeing that up. That is the big takeaway for tonight. What does that look like? And you will have, if you're going to have a big, robust discussion with a quorum, it will have to be filmed and all the things, broadcast and all the things. You know, you will have to have it in a duly called meeting. But I think to just get in the rhythm of that being part of what you do is something that Dr. Micah wanted from the beginning. It just didn't materialize. I didn't mean to speak for you, but I know you and I've talked about that.
It's okay, Dr. Gibson. I have a wife too. She does that too for me.
Yep.
It's okay.
I really did say what
You're
you were
doing
about
great.
to say. Okay, I really did say what he was about to say. So hold that thought, because that really is the last part of tonight. There's just one more quick thing, but is everybody good with and Dr. Micah, I like the idea of, now that the board has kind of heard about the cabinet's self-analysis, to periodically just bring this back and just say, you know, we had a conversation about, I call this the systems check. You know, how's the system doing? You know, where are we? And I think just to keep this going, it would be, I think it'd be a great idea.
Yeah, and just so you all know, since it is the new we have cabinet after every regularly scheduled board meeting. So the next day.
As a new we, can you tell me who's in cabinet?
Oh, who is in cabinet? That's a great question. So of course it's my executive staff, so that's them. And then it's all of the executive directors that are underneath them. So that is cabinet. So, I don't know, you've got, how many, Anthony? 5? Already had to count. Yeah, and then Deb, I think you have 4, right? And then Dan has 3. So that is cabinet. Does that help? That's who it is.
Yes, it absolutely
Yeah.
does. Thank you.
So we meet after every, no matter if we're here to midnight or not, at what is it, 9:30, I think we have them. We meet and we talk about state of affairs, that things are going on, and then periodically check in with this stuff.
I may use the term senior leader team sometimes as a broad term. It's the same as what they call cabinet, or you guys call cabinet. That's just a broad term, senior leader team.
And just one more, if I may, to Lisa's point, I know you're going to get this to the end, and I agree with what she's saying, just navigating as a newbie, but also you can't build trust unless you have those robust conversations, right?
Correct.
So I'm sure we'll talk about how those two things fit together at some point.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just tell you, all are earning an A. You're getting exactly to where Dr. Gibson and I talked about.
This is great, because
Yeah.
like we talked, and I thought we just got to get to what does this harmony look like before you cascade. So anyway, just good job, because we're gonna get to that now. I'm gonna make the thing that I was gonna spend a little more time on. There's 2 quick little snippets, and I'm not going to read to you. And I think, Dr. Mike, I might really just almost assign this as homework. But you received 2 pre-reads, Primer 1, developing the scorecard, and Primer 2, setting a cadence of accountability. So the Primer 1 is really in the past because the scorecard's developed. But I just want, and Ms. Villarreal, you may or may not, it's old brain. I just can't remember, I can't remember if you came on right after it was adopted or right as it was being.
It was being adjusted.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it had been adopted, but then she and Miss
Okay.
Landry came on when we made some tweaks to
Okay.
it.
So
right afterwards.
actually, this Primer 1 predate, this was the very first thing, but I felt that it would be good for you all to see what the board was looking at that time. And I'm going to, like give you the cliff notes of it. It's all the things that are up on the screen right now. We've got to have the right mindset. We've got to have team trust. You know, we've got to, and just to start thinking about empowering the superintendent and the senior leader team. And now I'm smiling at Deb again because we did our roadshow that month or month and a half and went out and just listened in any variety of audiences and then brought all that back. So that's everything that was happening when this primer 1. All right, then the primer 2 is the conversation Ms. Cox and Ms. Thompson. To me, this is that conversation that we're going to have later tonight. So like, how do we establish this cadence, and I'm going to call it cadence of accountability, you know, between the strategic team and the tactical team. If you flip to the back page, just trying to make it like really concrete, what do we want to talk about in August? What do we want to talk about in September? What do we want to talk about in October? And it doesn't have to look like this. It can look like, and I'll talk even Dr. Micah tonight very briefly about some districts are doing a BOY, MOY, EOY strategic roundtable. Instead of doing monthly, they're just doing it a couple of, 2 or 3 times a year. Anyway, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. And but I sent those out as pre-reads. Did they generate any questions? And if not, we can entertain questions the next time that I'm here.
So just, Dr. Gibson, if I may interject.
Yes.
Just so that everybody knows. So the way that began with and what we had landed on, and I think just to give you all some perspective, this new we is my 4th new we in 5 years. Okay.
That's an interesting observation that I
It
haven't
is.
thought of. Yes.
It is, okay? So I always have to remember I've got to do some historical stuff. So when we first built this and where that we at the time landed was the agreement was to this point about going into this in a deep way. I think Dr. Gibson at the time, you described it as a hike. You're going to take a
Day hike, but you get a granola bar and a bottle of water.
Right, you don't, that's right. It was a day hike and you get a granola, you don't get a full meal and to spend or whatever, right? But what we landed on, and Mr. Byer, you remember this, is we picked, myself and my team, said, okay, where does it make sense to talk about students? Well, we landed in January because that's when, TAPR, thank you. The TAPR report came. So we said, well, that makes sense. So we're going to do a deep dive that night and really go through a lot of this. Then, you know, and so we picked the budget. Stewardship was talked about in May because, well, that's budget. That's when it fit. So we really were picking. Staff was, I think, September, I think, is when it was, because the year had been up, so we could tell you about what staffing looks like and all of it, right? So we did that. It would take about an hour 15 minutes, because it really dove deep in. And what I had asked at that time, and Mr. Byer, correct me if I'm wrong, because you were here, was like, look, we're going to give it our best shot, because we had never done it, and we're going to try to cover things. Well, I'll just be honest, is we did it, didn't get much feedback, and then it became to the point where they were too long. So then it was, so now what? And I don't think we ever really landed on a really good spot. Is that fair?
I think
Mr.
that's
Byer?
fair, and I think we started that conversation and had some input from, you know, Mr. Jarrett and Mr. Jimenez and others about kind of what would make sense, and then we just kind of paused because we had a nice little workshop. We were all down on the floor around the tables talking about it, and I think we were trying to get to what does that rhythm look like? What is the amount of what we're receiving? What do we want to see? And we all, 7 similar but different ideas that we came to some agreements, but very loose, and then it all just kind of paused at that point.
And the thing is, and at that time, if I recall correctly, is my point was this scorecard while you all developed, and I think, am I hijacking this too much on you?
No, but there's
Okay.
one, I want you
Okay, can I
Go-
finish this
no,
real
no,
fast?
I
But
want you to finish
you
that.
all have a copy, and what we did through that process, and that's why there's those deep black lines, is to really separate where the board lives and where the staff lives. All right? Oh, okay. There should be one up there, and if there's not, I can send you one. Yep, that's it. And so we did that to delineate where that strategic and tactical role began and ended, and kind of where we live versus where you all live, right? And what I said at that time about reporting out was because, and Dr. Gibson, you correct me if I'm wrong here, when Dr. Gibson and I spoke about building the scorecard, I really pushed upon him to say I wanted to engage our community and our staff and our students, because we were talking a lot about student voice, is that if whatever you all came up with was you all as a board define it, and I remember that night with papers all over this place. Like it was
papered
sticky
the
notes
whole-
everywhere.
yeah.
And then you synthesized it. The board said, okay, here's what we think. And then we went out and held focus groups with a whole bunch of different people. Because I can remember one gentleman came in with a survey, and I had seen him at one of the meetings. And he came in and he goes, oh, it's you. And I said, yes, sir. And he goes, well, I was at this meeting. I said, great. And he goes, I'm here to drop off a survey. He goes, I know you're not going to read it. And I said, no, sir, incorrect. We are definitely going to read it and utilize it. Thank you so much for taking the time. Because what we were doing is verifying that what you had written as a board by identifying the priorities and the objectives, that our community, our parents, our staff, and our kids said, yep, you got it right. We too believe those are the important things. That then released us and my team to work on the key actions, the progress measures, and the outcomes. Okay, that's how it all transpired. Because what we were, so to this point about reporting, is I feel a very huge responsibility as a superintendent, not just to report it to you all, because you're living in it quite a bit more than most of our folks, right? But we also owe it to our community to tell them how we're doing as well. I believe that.
I
100%. Like,
I believe that you should believe
I,
that.
I believe that I need to go out to our community and be able to say, look, you told me this is what's important. Let me tell you how we're doing in it.
Yep.
I'm going to tell you our grows and I'm going to tell you our glows.
Yep.
Like, because done right, no matter what, there's always going to be something that we're always going to be able to be working on to get it better. We are not perfect, because if we would have written a balanced scorecard, and this is what I loved about it, it wasn't about what we were doing, it was what we aspired to do. Where did we want to get, knowing that it was going to take us 5 years to get there? Maybe 10 years, depending on
Sure.
how big the goal was. And it was all about coming back to say, we're progressing or we're not progressing, or here's kind of what we need, or maybe we need to shift gears because this strategy we applied didn't work after all.
And you, what's very typical right now, in my observation, is 2 5-year scorecards back to back, and at year 5, it's not a redo, it's a refresh. But then you're generally trying to keep a direction for a decade, and in this day and time, that is rare, right? Just, it's almost like every year, let's just reset everything, and the staff at the front line just, oh, here we go. I mean, like, we thought we were doing this, and now, so I think what you're designing is try to keep a direction, for at least a decade. That's rare. And Dr. Micah did a really good job describing all that. He left out the 3 weeks that Deb and I ate 3 meals a day in some room up on some floor, going through all that information. And Dr. Micah would come in, and we would download with him, and then we would just. But anyway, it was a very robust, and it was a fun process. Now that I've lived through it, it was a fun process.
And I want to interject a second. I know Mrs. Landry sent me a quick note, and I think I alluded to this, and maybe we just need to go back and watch that video from from that meeting, because I think there was some discussion about what the cadence needs to be, and maybe I don't have that information with me right now, and so maybe it's
Right.
worth going back and reminding ourselves. I know that was a previous
Right,
but it was also some board discussion that might be helpful to
okay.
to
For
all of us for
context.
context to
Yep.
really understand that, and then when we're able to all have a voice here present, we may have to work on locking that down a little bit better.
I
So
think that's good, and tonight, then, we're really just setting the context for that final.
I think so. I think the intent was to understand exactly what that cadence is supposed to be, but I think we need to, we'll have to do it again, and
So
whether
one
it's an
of this-
agendized item or.
This
Yeah.
graphic tonight, and then again at that meeting, Mr. Byer, I think is helpful to me, and maybe I'll check with Dr. Micah and you, and just, so it's continuous improvement, so that's based on Plan, Do, Check, Act, right? And then, just to be clear, the tactical role and the operational role are doing the doing and the acting. But we're saying, Dr. Micah's saying, pause periodically and engage the board in the check. Like, we have some data, and we want feedback. We want to hear from the trustees on the check part of it. And that, I'm gonna look over here now to the tactical team. Is that a fair enough way? Like, we've got some check data, we got some data, and we're willing. Anthony, you shared what that night at that meeting, my recollection was, Mr. Bauer, you looked at him and you said, what would you check? That just hit me, right? And you said, okay, I would check, and you had them top of mind. You rattled them off, right? So that he was sharing what he thought was the right things to check, and the board was going, okay, I can't think of anything other than those that we need to check. But is that it? This is, we're standing on a line here, and Dr. Micah mentioned the TAP-R. I just want to be clear, that report is all that is required by law. So we're talking about designing a system that well exceeds minimum requirements of statute. Now, why would we do that? Because we think it's more effective. And quite frankly, the TAP-R, whereas useful, much of it is old. Is that fair to say? It's old data, and by the way, you got to look back at it.
Our TAP-R report is 34 or 37 pages long
Correct.
or more. Like, it is, and it can drown you in data.
Right.
And for the record, can you give a quick expansion on what that acronym is?
Oh, TAP-R,
Academic progress report.
say that out, Deb.
I believe it's Texas Academic Performance Report. Or maybe the A is accountability, but I think it's academic.
It's something to that effect. It is called many things.
We have a billion acronyms.
Yes.
We don't even remember the real names because we just call them by the acronyms.
Some academic performance report. Okay. Mr. Bauer and Dr. Mike, if I may, real quickly, in 4 or 5 minutes here, I want to. This was not part of the first conversation, but I think it's something, especially in light of some new trustees, just like this is. I'm going to do 101, and my dad again helped me with this years ago. So we've talked about the strategic role, and that model is ubiquitous to any organization. And so I think it's unfair for me not to talk specifically about the difference between a trustee and a representative. And I just remember my dad, telling me this, and this is not the way I saw it, but I had the advantage of learning this early on. This is, by the way, this is in statute, it's in code. So I'm not like just making this stuff up. These are the rules around a representative. And I think many trustees, what I'm experiencing, let me say it this way, all over the state, is that in the absence of understanding this model, trustees assume that they are a representative. And the only thing that's the same between a representative and a trustee, in your case, is that you're elected by the public. Literally, that is the only thing, and then it starts changing after that. A representative is supposed to constantly check in with constituents, try to get a feel for what 51% or more of the constituents want, go away from where the constituents live, go to another location, the Granite Building in Austin, and then cast that vote based on what their constituents want. Ms. Caldwell, the Speaker of the House, to this day, and I love it, I think Judge Strauss started it, when they're going to call for a vote, he says, members vote your district. And he hits the gavel. And I get chills every time I hear that, because the House in Texas, I think, still believes that. I don't know about the other end of the building. But the House believes that they should vote their district. Well, see, they're a representative government. That's what he's saying, vote your district. A trustee is someone, in your case, that's elected. Oftentimes, trustees are appointed for the reasons I'm about to share. But you are being elected, I'm going to do in reverse order here, to be a critical thinker and a decision maker. And if you go up one, see, you are informed by knowledge and experience to serve the interest of others. You also, I'm going to add one, you are privy to information that the general public is not privy to. That's the role of a trustee. You go into executive session. You hear things that the general public does not hear. And I guess, and it's usually limited to schools, pension managers, charities, trusts, trust funds, et cetera. But by statute, you are supposed to have autonomy. And it didn't say this, but I'm going to infer this, to maybe go against your quote-unquote constituents because you have more information than they have. You see, like there's times when you may have to go against. Yes, ma'am.
Well, and that's, when we look at the difference between these two descriptions, how is this communicated to the district, you know, that, to the constituents, right, that,
I'm trying tonight, ma'am.
Okay.
Because I think I'm kind of joking, but I'm kind of not. I think we don't do a good enough job in the school business of helping people understand the difference between a trustee and a representative. That's why
very
this
much
slide is in
agreed.
here.
Yeah.
I think if I may, people, because they're elected and we're elected, so people assume that we have the same responsibilities.
That's correct.
Yeah, maybe.
And I know this sounds simple, and Ms. Thompson, I didn't mean to step on your words. Did that answer? Okay. I think we need to do a better job. That's why I brought this forward tonight in a public meeting. And I think in the future we're going to talk about a good governance handbook or board operating procedures. And it could be that this is not going to, all of tens of people are going to read your good governance handbook. You know, I'm joking, but I think this being embedded in it, like the definition of a trustee, it would be prudent for you all to do that. We need people to understand the role of a trustee versus the role of a representative. But I'll pause there for a second. For the very reason you brought up, Ms. Thompson, is the reason I felt like I wanted to get this out so we could have a discussion about it, because I think there's a big misunderstanding across the state. And I think it's causing problems all over the state.
And I would say, being in this position for 5 years is probably the first time I've seen this side by side. I don't know that we've ever actually gone through this in previous discussions. And that's not an indictment of you. It's just
the thought is,
that it's a
you know what, Mr.
interesting.
Breyer, I think I assumed that everyone knew it because
Yeah.
my dad taught it to me when I first,
Sure.
and I think that's not a good assumption. I
Yeah.
think this is something we need to share more. So-
And I will say, I mean, that doesn't mean that you don't listen to the
Oh,
people in your
absolutely.
community, but I think that's where you get into you're informed by knowledge, and that knowledge might be in here or it might be out
That's
from your neighbor.
correct.
But I think it's an interesting comparison between the two.
Well, and I would thank you for pointing out the informed. You know, I would think properly constructed, we can keep this harmony between the strategic and the tactical role, where trustees, you feel connected to what's happening in those key strategic actions. Dr. Micah, if I may, we said the tactical team does the doing and the acting. And I'm gonna use a metaphor for this, but if y'all remember, Steve Jobs ran Apple, and he created it and made the little computer that we used to sit at and all that. And then he, just kept going, right? Just stepped on the gas, and now we can have a computer that's in your hand and a computer that's on your wrist. When he quit and/or fired, I can't remember. Might have been right at the same time. They were about to converge. What he was saying no to was the shareholders, the board, wanted to just walk the floor and understand better how this thing was made. And I get that there's some of the things that were top secret. They were saying you don't have to take us into the top secret part. Just help us understand how it's made, because we have no context for you saying that it cost $1 billion and him saying it cost $1 million, right? And so he quit, and the second guy, he created boardwalks, so we're going to go walk. We're not going to the confidential part, but for them to just understand how the iPhone was made. Again, they weren't in there saying, no, that part goes there or that, but they went and they put eyes on it. And so, and then I think they said they became better board members. This is a little dicey, I realize that. But if there's a key strategic action happening there, and y'all are having a conversation in here, and there's an opportunity to go look at it, not in a quorum, because then you get into posted agendas and all that, we'll go look at what that reading strategy looks like. But then, trustees, do you all understand? Like, there's a lot of anxiety, whether you like it or not, or realize it or not, the second you're walking on campus with superintendent. Like, I don't know what starts going off, but invisible little Roman candles start firing off, so there's a lot of work that you have to do to say, no, we're just taking a peek at it, or whatever. Or no, but I'm just saying, that informed piece, it may be that in here, in this workshop setting that we're talking about at the times of the year, that's what that's all about. I need to be more informed on what that action really means, Mr. Jarrett. I just need to know what that really means.
So that's a great, and I've never heard that.
I pulled that just for you.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Gibson. So I'm going to use it. But let me give you that, because I'm going to go off of what Ms. Thompson asked earlier. I'm going to give you an example of it. I never thought of it through that lens. I invite you to convocation and to leadership for that very reason. I want you to hear what I'm telling people, because I'm giving you a little walk on the floor to know what we're talking about, what we think is important, and our work. That, yes, you're there to be supportive and stuff, but it's also I call it a peek behind the curtain. Yeah. That's what I call it. You're getting a peek behind the Wizard of Oz's curtain to see, hey, what's really going on there? That's why you're there. I probably have never done a very good job of explaining that, but that's it. I want you to hear what we're saying and to be a part, because Ms. Villarreal, Mr. Byer, now you've done a couple of years in this new format of convocation. And if you think about year one, because both of you, I think, pretty much did them all, and look at year two, how different they are. But you all gave me feedback after each one to say stuff like, hey, that was a tough crowd. Like, what's going on? See, you got to peek into a cluster and kind of how it works and its differences between other ones. And so, for the brand new ones, see, like next year, you're going to see again a different evolution. And just because one did it one way, it can change as people change within it. And so you're getting those glimpses in, maybe not to a reading strategy, but to how that cluster operates and how it functions and those leaders in it, because each one of those clusters has an identity. And you can feel it. Just like what I said at convocation about climate, you can just feel it the moment you walk in a building. You can't always put your finger on it, but something is either feeling really good or not feeling so hot. That's why we walk them. That's why I make them do it. Because they got to feel it. It's that peek in behind. We're not trying. I love Mr. Jarrett says it. We cannot run schools from central office. He is dead right. But we need to go out there. We need to take a peek. We're not going to tell the principal X, Y, and Z. We're going to try to inform them on some stuff. Probably maybe not a good idea. You may want to think about it, but you know your community. If you're telling us, then we're gonna say it, but we're also going to tell you what we think. But ultimately, we're not there to tell them how to run that school, because that's their job. Is that
I think
okay,
that's great.
Dr.
No,
Gibson?
I think that's.
Sorry, but that's a really, I've just
Well,
never heard about
in
Steve
my
Jobs.
mind, well, and truthfully, I just pulled that out of the hat tonight because I think that's germane to what we're talking about. That board wanted to just, and see, Jobs was like, no, there's top secret. Well, top secret's down in a room that nobody sees. So the trustees are not going to see that, or the board members are not going to see that. But they understood better how the watch was made and how the phone was made, and they just felt like that made them better board members. And then, by the way, he came back to work. Once he just wasn't going to be there when they did that, and then they were better board members, and he's like, oh, well, I want my job back. You're like, I want to be the chief operating officer again. So, Dr. Micah, for the balance of tonight, I know you had 2 or 3 things that I tried to queue up in the working agenda. You know, how we got here. This is we're down at item 4 right now, and you covered how we got here a while ago, and I think that was great. And would you want to add anything to how we got here? And trustees, do you have any questions about that, like quick timeline of the last 2 years? And it's almost, we did how we got here and then how we stopped, right? Because it just stopped. Okay, we froze.
I guess what I'm looking at is that indicator 1, which you called something else, but in the part that goes into checklist for why individual board members may leave the strategic role, and then one of the very first things is, it's tempting to take what you know from your own work experience and then assume it will apply to the district. I guess that is something that I need to internalize a little better. And then 20 signs the board has left the strategic role. I don't know too much historically, but I know that it's easy to do these things.
Yes, ma'am. And we, just so you know, and thank you for sharing that, seriously. And specifically saying I needed to see that number 1. So just so you know, we don't just sit around. I bring these from board members. Like, this list is created by board members. So I view Team of 8 training for the last 36 months as like an experiment where I just say, how'd you get out of the strategic role? And tally marks, right? And so this is just the list of what I hear from board members and my father. I keep going back to that. He started this list years ago. But yeah, I mean, it's not easy to be a trustee. It's not. And we've already touched on this tonight. Most people don't understand the role of a trustee. We just said that a while ago. And if that's the way you're feeling right now, that your feelings are shared all over the state. Most people don't understand the role of a trustee. And I think it's prudent to just like get these things out on the table and make them concrete so y'all can see them, especially new trustees, like you can see them ahead of time and not just have to live through each one of them. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I was just, number 2, under why they may leave, that strategic role, while powerful, is indirect leadership. And just as a new trustee, when people vote for you and elect you, I think they think you have, and back to it's an educational piece, right? That we have to kind of say, I hear you, I'll listen to you, but I'm one of 8. And so I appreciated that. Was kind of an interesting, just to see it written out like that it's indirect leadership. I guess I'd never really thought of it in that capacity.
Well, I'm going to thank you for sharing that. Dr. Micah even indicated a while ago that his leadership is not direct leadership. Because he said he's talking to someone that's talking to someone. Is that fair, Dr. Micah? And he has to watch out.
Right. And Dr. Gibbs, look, we talk about this, Mr. Jimenez and I talk about it a lot. When an assistant principal moves up to become a principal, do you know what they spend most of their first few months doing? Assistant principal work.
Yeah.
Because it's what you know.
Yep.
So I'm going to put myself out there. When I first became superintendent, I was in y'all's tactical stuff an awful lot. And I had to learn to step out of that, because that's not my role to do their stuff. My role is to think strategically about what they're doing and how it interconnects. And it's hard. Like,
Yes.
it really is. And they've all four of them, have seen sometimes the weight that it's on me about how, Peggy, you're in with me all day. I feel bad for her. She didn't even marry me.
No choice.
But they see how that strategic thinking, because you're, to your earlier point, right? You're going to pull a lever and you don't even know some of the ripples that it's going to set. And what our analogy to the ripples is, don't cut the red wire. We talk about it all the time. The problem is sometimes you don't even know the red wire.
They're all white.
Correct.
But
Or
one
they're
of
all
those-
red.
or they're all
And you're
red,
like,
yeah.
well, which, right? And that strategic piece. And so over time, I had to learn how to start removing myself, letting them do the tactical work, while constantly thinking strategically. That's why, for those of you that have been into the blue room, there are 4 questions. I'm not like Mr. Jarrett. I don't write in colors all over my board. But there are 4 questions, and they're there because and there aren't any answers, by the way. There are some, but I'm not sure the answer. Like, it haunts me. And I live in that role constantly. And Mr. Jarrett, we joke about it, but he's like, when I walk in and I say, I've been thinking, he's like, oh no. Am I right? See? Because he's like, he knows I've been unpacking something in this, and it's going to equate to where there's a heavy lift coming, right? But what keeps us working is we're grounded in that same, we're aligned with what we believe has to happen. Where we differ sometimes is how to get there, and that's where we talk about it. But ultimately, my job, once I set that strategic piece for him to go, say, he's got to go do it, because I can't. I can't do it.
Peter Drucker, the leadership guru, and by the way, all my examples are old school, so it's old school, but he called this concept get out of the middle. And it's a great concept. So be clear about what you're trying to accomplish, the objective up front, and be clear about the measure that we'll be looking at the end, and get out of the middle. And then if you read his whole book, he says get out of the middle, but do regular check-ins. But he just means you became the CEO because, in your case, because you were the best tactician, right? You were the assistant principal that was the best at that. And we got to get you, you're not supposed to be under the hood anymore with the tools in your hand. You're supposed to be reading the iPad, interpreting what the data is that we're getting from the analytics. Is that a fair analogy? And it's hard for them to get out from under the hood because they got the job because they were good under the hood, right? And they got the job for that. And it's like, someone else is under the hood. You're supposed to read the analytics. And Ms. Cox and Ms. Thompson, thank you for this checklist. As Dr. Michael was talking, I was reading number 4 and number 5 on the why the board members may leave. It's Tim, and he was given an example for himself, by the way, but it applies in this case. So it's tempting, number 4, and often less stressful and strenuous to dabble in tactics than to think strategically. Like he was saying that strategic thinking is not a lazy or passive endeavor, it's hard. And then the 5th one, and I bump into this all over the state with board members, like, if you'll just do this, it'll be okay. Well, I mean, he's a welding shop manager, and I've been a welding shop manager, so I'm not, But how to get something done in a welding shop is different than how to get something done at a school, right? I mean, it's just pick up that piece, put it by that piece, get the right person over here and weld it together. It's not that easy in public education.
And
But thank you, Ms. Thompson, Ms. Call, for pointing those out. Or do any of the others?
Well, I wanted to say that, I know, Ms. Thompson, you don't mind me saying, we had a conversation, because I know we talked about, some of us have more direct experience to a school district than others. Planting trees and shrubs as a landscape architect doesn't have a direct correlation. But if you've worked in the school district, I think there are valuable things that you can bring to the table, and you elevate those to more of a policy level. And if there are things that are, I'm not, pervasive is the wrong word, but if it's a one-off situation, that's one thing. But if they're using your background and your history and your knowledge to raise to the strategic level, I think that is important. I don't think that's you getting into and dabbling with the day-to-day operations of things. I think that would be you sort of being informed on what might be better district-wide. And not that, again, you have the answer for everything, but you have a knowledge set that some of the other of us might not have. Ms. Chidi also has some, institutional knowledge that can be helpful. So it's not that your own work experience, don't assume that it will, but I think you can use it to come to the table with something that's broader, maybe, or figure out, and like you said, I need to internalize that and figure it out, but how do you elevate that to something that's a little bit more broad-based and not the pencil needs sharpened, so therefore we're going to get everybody a pencil sharpener. It's like, okay, well, why are the pencils not sharp? And figuring out how to address it at that level instead. So, and I think all 7 of us individually can bring little things here and there, because if there's some operational thing that it's something related to land development, of course I start looking at it, it's like, oh, maybe I know this, but I do and I don't, because it's maybe not exactly what I deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that's a really good, and it's making me, in my last superintendent's job, we had around 1,200 teachers, and you'll probably have 5 times that, or at least, so at least 4 times that. And, I would talk to a teacher or 2, and I put myself out there, like I was out and about, and, I would just get an earful. I would have, and man, I would just, like, my heart, my head, like they've got my full attention, and I would have to say to myself, there are 1,199 more teachers, right? Like, I can't go back to central office. I can go ask questions. Like, my sentences better finish with question marks and not exclamation points, because I talked to 1 of 1,200. Is that fair? And Dr. Michael, you were kind of like on that a while ago, and I think that's true for board members as well. Like you talk to 2 or 3, and it feels like, oh my God, or the amplification on social media now, and you have to remember that we have 4,000 teachers, and I'm hearing from 4. And I don't think you want them to not give you feedback of what they heard, but to expect a cause of action on 0.001% of the total amount, that's kind of reckless. And
Wow.
I would have to remind myself of that.
Well, and Dr. Gibson, just so you all know, this, Deb and I would go to the Capitol, and this is literally what I would say to lawmakers. Before you pass a bill about something in education, can you just ask the question, how big of a problem is it? Because I said so many pieces of legislation has been passed because one school district was a bad actor. And so now you're punishing the system rather than figuring out how to punish the actor. And so, like, look, I'm the first one to say we're not perfect. We're always trying to get better. My analogy, Dr. Gibson, that I've always used, and I try to impart to them so they understand my thinking, I'm a golfer. And what I always ask people is, what's the perfect round of golf? It's 18 strokes. That's 18 holes in one.
That's a heck
But-
of a drive
but-
on
but-
three.
Pardon me?
Yeah.
But-
It's
but
a heck
Doc-
of a drive on 3 of them, but yes, you're
But
right.
right,
It- yeah.
but here's the thing. But that's how my mind thinks.
Yeah.
And see, what's different, and God bless the people that work with me, because it's not about never being satisfied. But when you're the reason this came about is I was a scratch golfer before kids and a doctorate and all that stuff. Well, when you play that well, you beat everybody pretty much you play with. So what keeps you motivated? What keeps you pushing to get better is you have to compete up here. Well, I learned a long time ago to compete up here. And so I always look at the perfect round of golf. I know to most people, they just think you're nuts. I found my tribe, to use some words, when I found Google, because Google asked the question. One day I was in a conference and they said, close your eyes. So everybody in the room closed their eyes and they said, transport to China. Okay? That was the activity. So people closed their eyes and they said, open them up. They said, we don't need you to answer, but most of you in this room just now said, that's stupid, that's impossible. But one or two of you in here were like, wouldn't that be cool? And I wonder how that would happen. They're like, you're the moonshot thinker. That's who we hire at Google. You're deeply bothered by a question and you just relentlessly pursue it till you find an answer. Does that sound familiar, Steph? Yeah, sorry about that. That's me. Once I sink in, I am deeply consumed with that piece. But I have to balance it, Dr. Gibson, by not hearing what I want to justify, what I already believe. I have to validate it through a lot of people. And that's why you hear me and heard me say at convocations, when we come in your room, talk to us. That's my ask. I need to hear the good stuff, but I also need to hear some other stuff. But just because one teacher tells me it doesn't mean I come running back here and say, oh my gosh, like I've got to validate that through 4,000 others. Now that's not 4,000, but I'm going to ask some others, is that as pervasive as you profess it to be? Because it's easy sometimes, especially when they say something that I'm like, yes, I've been thinking about that. And now I'm like, hold on, temper, time out. Is it just me wanting to hear it? Or is that really real before I act? That's the battle I fight.
And when we're in this space, it's making me, and I apologize, the 3 newbies, but I want you to feel like you have a tool, not just a concept. And if I'm you and you're understanding, we're peeling back the layers of the onion here, and this difference between a trustee and a representative. Tomorrow, just because you know this doesn't mean somebody's not going to hit you up in HEB. I'll just say it that way, right? Okay, all right. Okay, they will, that's right. But, maybe, and Dr. Mike, I think about, I got better with teachers as superintendent, listening and saying, and I think you and I shared a turn phrase, that may be true. And so years ago, we talked about that, and we both like that. You may be right. That's right. So we shared that because, and you don't necessarily have to use that, but, I generally would say I need some time to think about it as superintendent. Now for you, I think you could say, could you put it in writing to me so I can get it to our superintendent? And Dr. Michael, would you, and then you're going to take it and it's going to go in whatever bucket it goes to, right?
I'm being validated to my left.
I saw that.
Because that's it. I mean, here's it. And then, because what I'm going to do is stop. We're going to look into it. And then we're going to report back. Here's what I know at this moment in time or whichever. Oh, you got some other additional information. That's fine. That's what we do. We look into things.
And the step of asking for it in writing, I think, is just, are you really serious about it? And I think a lot of times people just want to vent, and so, okay, let them vent. And now I know I'm kind of in y'all's space now, but to me, let them vent. You know, I've got a few minutes, so I'm going to let them vent. To me, the test was if they were serious about wanting to really know something about it, they would follow up with me. And then I think the added benefit of that is then you can say that I can get it to the superintendent's office. And, you know, and I did see Ms. Villarreal with you nodding your head. So was that your experience when you got on the board and then you just learned? Because by the way, if you start trying to take care of all those, how many people live in Northeast ISD?
Several 100,000.
Yeah, 400,000. That's how many people are going to be on your to-do. I mean, like truthfully, like it's just like where can it stop? If
Well, here's been my experience, you know, because when I got into this, I had no idea what a trustee did. None. Zero, zip, zilch. And what I've learned over this last couple of years is that I can actually trust this guy sitting here, and I don't have to do it myself, which is wonderful because I do everything myself, essentially, because I own businesses and things like
Right.
this. So it was very difficult to actually learn those words. Would you please put it in an email form, send it to me so that I can get it to our superintendent, who, by the way, is fabulous, and he will get it done. It's like magic. It just happens, and he gets to the bottom of things. And when I learned the trust, that I could trust him, that he would actually do the right thing, then it was easy. Oh, my goodness. Oh, yeah.
yeah, and again, I think and thank you for sharing that because I did see her when I was telling that story, nodding her head. So thank you for sharing that, Ms. Villarreal. So anyway, does that help the others to just start thinking about you know, what people think that it is and then what it is? Boom, like now y'all have to do what it is and not what people think it is. But I hope these are some tools, maybe, like we're getting a little more concrete, Ms.
Yeah,
Cox.
no, I think so. I think just personally, I have a lot of different hats, and when have been one thing, heavily involved with PTA, and then you're now a school board trustee, those people may still hope to have the same conversations. So for me, that's kind of been a learning curve for me to realize that, yes, while you're still my friend and we've been PTA moms together forever, now I have this new hat. And so
Right.
that's been kind of a learning piece for me, just to remember that it's a privileged position and I have privileged information. And, you know, I want to hear them as a school board trustee and be there for them for a friend, but remember that those are two now very different spaces, I guess.
I think about, I went from government and economics teacher to assistant principal at the high school in the middle of the year. And one day I was teacher and the next day I was assistant principal and I went in the teacher's lounge. I was kind of the life of the party in the teacher's lounge one day and I walked in the next day and it just went dead quiet. I mean, like you could have heard a pin drop, but it's because the position changed and we're not going to be quiet as, you know, and I had to kind of, I was like, what? But, you know, they said, well, you'll have to earn our trust. We liked you as a fellow teacher. We're going to have to see how you do as an administrator. All right, thank you for sharing that. Yes, ma'am.
One thing that I've had to learn to say to people, and this is something that I actually need some validation on this. When people ask me questions, I say, are you asking me as a trustee or as a friend? And if we get into a discussion, I always say, I'm not here as a trustee. I'm not giving you advice as a trustee. I'm talking to you as a friend. And so I try to make sure that they understand that there is a difference there. I said, if you want information as a trustee, please put it in writing and send it through the NEISD website. And so I'm very careful, and I'm hoping I'm doing the correct thing.
Well, I think that clarity up front, I can't help but go with the part of my mind that not everybody might have the same positive presupposition as you, and I'm not just talking about you, I'm trying to protect all of you, and they might try to leverage that blurred line to put you in a bad spot. So I know my dad said, I am always the board president, even when I sleep. I mean, and I was like, well, Dad, that's what, and he's like, I'm still going to talk to the guys at the coffee shop. But he said, the tough part is in the middle of the night, if I wake up, I'm the board president. I mean, you know, and it's just like that, I just kind of like, I chose this, and so, and I'm not saying don't have friends, Miss Villarreal, that is not what I'm saying, but yeah, it should not work, because you should have friends. But it is tough to just then, it's just a different role all of a sudden. And in the election, it feels like there's a lot of build up, and then boom, you're the trustee, like next day. Kind of like me walking into the teacher's lounge, right? It's just the next day, it's a different story. Mr. Byron, Dr. Micah, Dr. Micah, we're at, what are we doing now? And I think you covered that well, like what's the history of the scorecard and then what we're doing now. Is there anything you want to add to what we're doing now? And then, Mr. Bauer, I just want to double check. Earlier in the meeting, you said we might level set tonight and then have the other two here when we have the full discussion about what the reporting and all of that. I just want to double check.
Yeah, I didn't want to get too far ahead on detailed discussions without the
I think
full,
that's
the full
fair.
group here. So whatever, I don't know what that means, other than, if there's a logical spot where we park, and if you want to talk about a few things, or if we have to kind of wait.
Well, I love what Miss Landry texted you about, and quite frankly, I think you all and look, we can help you. We can go and pull the video and clip it and send it to you from that discussion, that last discussion about the scorecard and kind of what we were talking about, because this scorecard has evolved a little bit, because this one doesn't have, you can see it in blue, that 1.1a, but when you actually click on it now, it takes you to the measurement, to these outcomes. Like, so, Mr. Byer, I would say one is probably we can get you all a clip of that video, if that would be helpful for everybody to watch, and then go to the board page and actually click on this stuff to kind of see, because, and then look, I explained this to a trustee. I said, think of me like your tour guide. I'm here to help you go on the tour and be successful, right? Like, so then when you're clicking, go like, I don't understand this, reach out to me, let me know, and we'll help guide you through it, so that, oh, okay. You and I had a conversation yesterday, Ms. Coxon. Hopefully by the end I made some sense and some clarity, and from that conversation you helped me see some things in a different way and some clarity, that we were able to go and get there, right? I think that might be a good spot to kind of, because we've talked about it, but then we can listen to the discussion, and then you all can look at that scorecard piece, and then we can come back, because you may agree with what was discussed tonight and say, you know what, we're fine with that. That's fine by me. Or you may say, you know what, we listened to that, but here's what, I don't know what y'all will agree with, but that at least gives you the real sense of the last piece of because you said we stopped, right? I'll say we froze. That then at least knows there's where we left off, this was the last piece. Because I think we've articulated how and the why we did a scorecard, but now it's that last piece of, do we like it still, and then how do we report it?
I think that's a good way to frame it up.
Yeah, and I oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were about to talk. Go ahead.
I just had a question. Why did we freeze? Is that loaded?
No,
Okay.
I think, Ms. Thompson, I think in the end, no, it's a fair question. I think because in the end, I'll use Dr. Gibson's words, there has to be harmony around it,
Yes.
right? And we have to, and Ms. Villarreal reminds me of Dr. Gibson saying this every now and then. When the board sneezes, the district catches a cold. I know. She reminds me of this, right? But that's that piece. That's that harmony that we need to come to, because again, it's just like what I said about Mr. Jarrett and I. Sometimes we don't agree with how to get there. And we have some pretty robust conversations, or Mr. Jarrett or Ms. Caldwell. We've all had them. but we're all still working toward that same goal. And that's the harmonious, in my opinion, part, and Dr. Gibson, correct me if I'm wrong.
No,
But
it's
that's
perfect.
it. It's that we're all still trying to hit that target. We can talk about how to get there and agree or disagree, whatever, but in the end, that goal still has to be very clear so that I know it, so that I know what you're wanting, and two, so that I can deliver it back to them to say, here is what our board cares about, and this is the work. Because why, one part I left off, if you don't mind, Dr.
No, that's
Gibson,
good.
is
We're in good. Good
I
time.
can remember the excitement my team had as I talked to them about going this balanced scorecard. And the amazing thing is they're like, this is going to give us the authority to say yes, because that's what Mr. Jimenez and I talked about is, how do we say yes? Because we were really good at saying no. But how do we say yes? And then Mr. Jarrett said, and this also helps us say no, but in a respectful way. Because I'm not saying that idea is not great, but we've committed to this work, and this is what the work we're committed to. And if the board says we want to do something different, that's one thing. But until that point, and again, I say the board, it was our community and our kids and our staff who also agreed, yep, this is the work we believe you up there need to be working on. And I feel that call to all of them to say, if you believe in it, then we owe our best effort every single day to do that work to the very best of our ability. And when we miss a mark, which we will, then to own it, then talk about a plan on how to improve it. And when we hit a mark, to celebrate it, because it deserves to be celebrated. But then not to freeze in place with it, but to think about now what's next. How do we get, to my point with you heard me say about the story of Lego, right? A 0.1 millimeter change created the Lego. That's the thickness of a strand of hair. How do we get 0.1 millimeter better? Because we made it, great. Now how do we get just a little bit better? That's always the charge.
I think when we started, can y'all see that? Did you? No, I was looking for, can you see what I'm looking at the screen. You got it in front of me. Okay, good. Good to know now that we're nearly finished. So Ms. Thompson and Dr. Mike did a great job, I think, of recapping that. When I look at that, so we had done some mindset work. If you think about systems framework, that's the lined arrows. Then there's the strategy execution tools, the scorecard. Like mindset, and I probably didn't do as stringent of a job then as I do now. Those are in order. Like we just kind of introduced them all. They're in order. And if the mindsets, now I'm going to flip to mindset, and I want you to watch the first one that pops up. You see, and so I think it was prudent to pause because there was a mindset shift. Is that fair to say? And it was just like, this is not going to, like, it's not going to work. So let's just pause. Yes, ma'am.
I have to say that the change in this board and the dynamics and what the new board members bring to the table is amazing.
Yes.
And frankly, I completely trust everybody that's on this board now. It's a complete 180 from what we had before. And I think, that being said, I think we're going to do some amazing things together.
Absolutely. There's no reason why you are not capable of doing that now. Is that
Absolutely
right?
no reason
The ceiling
why.
has just been raised on performance.
So, to piggyback on what she just said, I hear Dr. Micah saying that they have open, honest conversations. Sometimes it's messy, but to get all those arrows going in the same place, there has to be communication and there has to be trust. We're new to one another, and I think the reason we've gotten as far as we've gotten so quickly as we spent a lot of time at graduation and at convocation, just having non-parliamentary procedure conversation, and yet, you know, somebody else walks up, we have to stop talking because of the, you know, the walking quorum and all of those things. So I wish there was a way for us to debrief and to have conversation that propels us forward, so we don't freeze and so that we don't stop and we don't stay in the same place.
Dr. Micah, I mean, I think there's a middle ground in here somewhere. I really do. And it, you know, may be the workshop setting. And the work session. And I'm not saying that's the be all and end all, but good work, I think, happens. I almost did this tonight. I kind of wish I would have. So I bring a tennis ball now to board meetings, and so I get the trustee that's closest to me, and I say, the goal is for all the trustees to touch the tennis ball as quickly as possible. I just hand it to this trustee. And so they pass it around, and the first time it's kind of like, okay, and then I say, and then it comes all the way back around. I say, okay, do it faster. You know, and then it just goes faster. I say, okay, do it faster, do it faster. And then they realize they get out of the dais and get down here, and they all just touch the tennis ball. So because sometimes I think that speed and the speed of trust, I think sometimes is better served. I get the dais, I believe me, at formal meetings where we're just doing the business of the district, that's where I wanted to be, and I needed notes everywhere and all the things, right? I think that concept of coming off for a work session, you know, whatever that means, and we're not trying to define it tonight, we've got two trustees not here, I think is part of maybe the direction forward.
Well, and I think, and Ms. Landry actually sent me another email, just kind of giving her thoughts on sort of the cadence, but also brings up a good question that I think is valuable for all of us, is that not necessarily, well, what do we want? Well, it is kind of what we want, but at the same time, how much burden is that going to put on staff to produce whatever that is?
Right.
And so, you know, if that's a monthly cadence, how much extra work is that? Or is it more work? Or if it's a quarterly cadence, what is it? So just things to think about. And I think having that, the context of that previous meeting, again, whether you agree with it, don't agree with it, whatever, I think will be helpful to understand where,
good.
because I think there was some discussion with staff where they expressed a lot of their thoughts on what the thing would be, on what things should look like. Because like Mr. Jared said, he goes, I can give you 3,000 points of data if you want it, and I can give
talk
it, and I
SAT
can give
for
it
a
to you
week.
tomorrow. You know, but that's not realistic and that's not practical.
Correct.
So anyway, good
So
things to think about.
I'm hearing that we'll pause, Dr. Micah and Mr. Bauer, and like watch the clip. And if I may, just in conclusion tonight, if you all don't mind, we may have like an awkward 60 seconds of silence here. But I want you to think about and jot down something that became or is clear as a result of tonight, and then something that's still a little unclear. And if you feel comfortable, I want everybody to share out something that's clear. Dr. Michael, you don't have to play along, but you can if you want to. But trustees, clear and unclear. The contractions are coming more often. All right, everybody ready? You mind sharing out? Especially, I'm going to jot down the unclears, y'all know, because I want to make sure that we're good the next time. Ms. Cox, I'm picking on you because you're right over here by me. Are you good with?
Fair enough. Yep.
Okay.
I'll go first. Well, I think this seems simple, but I think my role is clearer. And I really appreciate the definition, the distinctions between representative and trustee. I've never thought of it in that capacity. I know what both of them are. Spent a lot of time with representatives. So I think I have a better understanding of that, and I can kind of help that educational piece. I think we have a lot. I feel better about my role and what it is, and where I should be and what I should be doing and saying, and that sort of stuff. At the same time, respecting the people that elected, the teachers and staff and the scorecard, and just that I have that ability to kind of understand that and have that as educational piece, which I think is really important, because I do think a lot of people have absolutely no idea what we really do on a day in and day basis, and that they don't understand that we're one of 8. So I feel that's much clearer for me. My big thing is where I'm still struggling, I guess, or my issue. It's not really an issue, but it's how I guess I need more, and I'm sure you'll talk to this, how we get trust, how we work on trust, and how we build that trust. And that might be just something, specific to me, but I think that's so important, and it's anywhere you go. It's whether you're on a PTA board or any other sort of anything, even when I deal with my students, I have to build a sense of level of trust with them with me and me with them. So I think that would probably be where I would need the most work.
Very good. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm not going to respond to every one of them. I'm just going to jot down notes. But I had like all kinds of thought bubbles. But anyway, I won't. But thank you for sharing, Ms. Villarreal. Or you. And by the way, it's going to get harder and harder, Ms. Thompson. So you feel free to say ditto. Just confirm them if you don't mind. Yes, ma'am.
This is the same actual thought that I had from the last time you did this workshop, is getting to the appropriate amount of data that, that these poor people over here have to pull for us, make it more manageable, because I need relatively small amounts of data to make a decision. It's either going to be logical or it's not. And if you start confusing the issue with so much data, then it's going to be way more difficult to make a decision over something. So, but the problem is there's 7 of us, and each needs a certain amount of, we have different personalities where they may need a lot more data. So how do we actually find that balance? That's something that, yes, we sit down, and we do a workshop, but then how do we actually come to that sort of consensus, and it's not just some kind of a pie in the sky and all that, and how do we convey that to them, or actually to him, so he can do that. And I'm going to make a clear affirmation here on what I'm absolutely positive about. I said this board will work together in a positive way to help the district move forward. And all our little arrows are going to all be pointing at the same direction. And I can read people very quickly. And I know who you are the first 3 seconds that when I meet you, I'm going to know who and what you are. And I will tell you this, from the moment, we sat down and we actually had a discussion when I was invited. And of course, I was still butthurt over the way the thing, went. But when I sat down with these two, I realized at that moment that my fears were unfounded. And then I, met everybody else, and I realized that this board is going to do great things, because I think we're all going to work together.
Very good. Mr. Bauer, do you mind going last?
Quite all right.
All right, I'm gonna rescue Ms. Thompson. You can say the ditto. Ms. Thompson, or did you?
A couple of things. One of them was to have a continuous improvement mindset, and just for us to make sure that what is improvement to me is also improvement to other people, right? Because that's making all the arrows go forward. Definitely workshops to just have some conversations about things. I know we talked a little bit about how we got here, but there's, I feel like, still
Okay,
some more I could know about that.
all right.
You said the thing about get out of the middle. I liked that. And then I feel like this 20 signs that the board or an individual board member has left the strategic role, like I need to post that next to my bed. All of us need to post this next to our bed to make sure, I mean, I think that these things break down trust. And
I
so,
hope you understand that's the only reason that they're presented.
right,
Because that's
absolutely.
the
No,
stuff
I,
that chips away at.
yes, those things chip away at trust
Yep.
for me and probably for other people too.
And if you lose your hard copy, Mrs. Turner emailed all those to us, so you have
I
a
know,
digital
well, I
copy too.
printed them and Ms. Turner had them available to me also. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then just what Ms. Cox said, like, we need time, all 8 of us together, to build that trust. I mean, I understand we all have crazy schedules, but I definitely need Team 8 time.
Thank you. Ms. Chigi?
Well, and this is not what I wrote down, but what she just said piggybacks on what she just said. She started trusting because she had that time with us, and it was two-way. I mean, the arrows went together. So, what I'm clear about, I guess I'm more concrete than I think I am. I'm maybe random concrete or something, but these stages really spoke to me because that first stage, I'm really a Covey person, and that first stage is definitely reactive,
Yes,
and we don't
ma'am.
ever want to stay in that reactive place, and you're going towards proactive. And if you're a 2.8 or a 2.9, I'm going to say you're a 3. And I get the 3, which is very proactive. So what I'm unclear about is how do we get from 3 to 4? I mean, maybe we'll never have that 18-hole game of golf, but, I want to move us. I don't like that freeze thing. So I feel like we track our success. I mean, there are things on there I feel like we do, but like you said, how do we move forward in straight lines and agree on what that looks like? So that's what I mean, I guess that's what everybody's looking for in every company, right? But that's certainly, how do we get from 3 to 4 is what I'm
I
unclear
love it.
about.
I wrote it down just like that. How do we get from 3 to 4? That's
Okay.
exactly the way I wrote it down.
Concrete.
Yep. Sir, you get to wrap it up.
So I think, as Ms. Cox said, that slide about the representative versus the trustee, I think it's all things that we all know and inherently sort of think about, but when it's presented on paper like that, it's a pretty powerful tool to show what that is and where we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to be kind of thinking of things. The other thing that's clear is that Dr. Micah apparently plays too much golf in his free time and is trying to get to that 18 holes, but no. And then the where does it fit on the scorecard, which is a great idea to remember for all of us. So the unclear part, similar to Ms. Chigi, is how do we get the astronauts to the moon? How do we get to stage 4?
How do we get
How do you- well,
Yeah.
yeah. If you're some companies,
That's
it's how
really
you
good.
get them back. Yeah. But I agree. I think there's a lot of that 2 and 3 where I think we're hitting on some of those spots here and there, and maybe we can't definitively say we're on 3, but I think we're close. And then I'm excited about that next step. Not to gloss over stage 3, but how do we get to that sort of perfect harmony, which starts with us, obviously. So,
Well said.
yeah.
In fact, perfect harmony starts with us. It sounds like a good ending to this meeting, Dr. Micah, if you're good with that.
Yes. So as part of that, and Dr. Mike can fill in, I guess, some of the detail with some of this, but we do have Dr. Gibson available to us for the rest of the year, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
So
For a
we'll,
grant,
oh, for a year,
yes.
for a year. So, and that is, well, it's at no charge to the district.
Correct.
If we need to put that on the record.
No, I think that's good.
But, and the good thing about that is, and he and I had a really quick conversation prior to us all coming out here and just saying, you know, for the two trustees that had previous engagements that weren't able to make it, you know, he's available to them to really kind of help them answer questions or answer their questions if they have any. And then we can set sort of that, our own cadence of when we need to meet with him to kind of get this off center a little bit. And so I
It's,
think that's a great tool
Very
for us.
flexible also.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be in the constraints of just, it has to be one way.
Right.
The wording of the grant's very flexible, and I'm very flexible.
And I want to also reiterate something that Dr. Micah says all the time, is that I don't want, although we are all interested in moving this forward and getting to stage 4, I don't want time to be the determining factor. I want to make sure that the 7 of us are comfortable, and if one of us is not comfortable, then none of us are comfortable. So let's let the process do what it needs to do and not be beholden to, okay, well, we have to have this by December and we have to have this by January, that kind of thing. And that's just for us getting to the point then where we can tell people, okay, now we're going to have this report in January and this report in August, whatever that looks like. But I want to make sure that we all get to that point where Dr. Micah, staff have absolute clear direction on what they're giving us, what our expectations are, so that they can do the work that they need to do. So,
Just a question, and this is for our mighty leader over here, because we're starting out a new year, and wouldn't it behoove us to kind of have maybe a round little workshop, you know, before we get too far into this year, so that they know with this new board
Yeah.
what our expectations are? Because I don't want them to go out and, you know, pound their head against the wall and think that, you know, and not know what we want.
sure, and I agree, and I think, yes, we need to have something sooner rather than later. What that looks like, we'll have to see. We need everybody to have time to look at the old video, get some context, and I'm not suggesting that's going to take 4 months, but maybe it is going to take another 6 weeks before we can do anything, or for sure a month, whatever it might be with the other meetings and stuff we have scheduled. So I'll talk to Dr. Micah about that, and we'll get a consensus from everybody, kind of what works best, what day works best. We'll work through Peggy to get that information and go from there. But I agree with you fundamentally that I don't want to lose momentum on that. And so I think this next workshop meeting we have needs to happen sooner than later. After that, again, I don't want to just rush things, because there might be a chance for Mr. Jimenez to digest what it is we're asking, and then he may come back and say, well, hang on a second, I've looked at it, and now I need to, you know, you wanted something every month, maybe I need to just do it quarterly, because I really can't do something every month, or whatever it is. So there might be some back and forth there with that part of the process, but to kick this off and for the 7 of us and Dr. Micah to get back together, yes, I think we need to do that.
And I
Soon.
stand ready, and I think I'm in San Antonio more now that I live in Graham than when I lived in Schertz. I think I'm in, so anyway, I'm here a lot, I'll just say that. So we can, anytime, I stand ready. Thank you all for letting me
right.
be part of this.
Anything else for Dr. Gibson before he steps away?
Is
Just
the
one thing.
baby?
Nobody,
Yeah, I was gonna say, how's that?
Congratulations.
Hold on. Nope, but no, everything's progressing fine. It's just been a long day.
Yeah.
I'll text you, Dr. Micah, when the picture here a little bit.
like to know, I guess
Yeah, let us know so I can let them.
Okay, I will. I'll let you
And
know.
include pictures?
I will do that.
Okay.
It's in Fort Worth, so that's actually where I'm going now, so.
Okay.
Oh.
Well,
I'll
thank
head to
you.
Fort Worth and see.
Always, thank you for your time.
Yep, my
Thank you for
pleasure.
being here. We appreciate
Thank you all
what
for
you're helping
allowing me
with.
to be here.
Yep, absolutely. All right, item 3, board president comments. I actually did have a couple of things I wanted to bring up, just for information only, not for discussion at this point, but just so that everybody's here and gets it at the same time. One, don't forget to get Dr. Micah, or I'm sorry, get Peggy any committee assignments that we've talked about. Please send those to Peggy so that she can have them, if you haven't already sent them. And that could be for the efficiency committee, the facilities committee. If you have your shack membership sort of ready to go, you can send that to her. Wall of Heroes, which won't be until the spring, but if you have somebody for Wall of Heroes, please send those to Peggy, and then she can just keep those on file for whenever it is that we need to have those. The most pressing one is the efficiency committee that is starting next week for the first meeting. So have your one community member and your one parent. And if you don't have them, it's not the end of the world. We can bring them in. Obviously, it'd be nice if they were there at the first meeting to help set the schedule and kind of what that process is. But we will not turn away your parent or community member if they miss the first meeting. So they can be brought into the fold pretty easily. I know I've sent out an email sent an email to Ms. Turner, who then sent it out to everybody. Just remember, emails, texts, that kind of thing, are just another reminder to be careful when you don't reply all. Mr. Lopez talked about it at the last meeting. I sent everybody the different policies, so you can click on those links and read the local policies about open meetings and all of that. Just a general reminder. I know we're getting into the school year. We're going to get a lot of updates. We're going to get information from Ms. Turner. And so if you have a question or a comment about any of those things, just please reach out to them individually. Just don't hit reply all, just so we avoid any kind of potential quorum or walking quorum with that. So on the heels of what we just talked about, kind of the where does it fit on the scorecard, as we get into the year and our regular meetings, there will be discussions about, what do you want put on the next agenda? Do you want presentations as a report, that kind of thing? Just be mindful of, and I think we talked about it at the last meeting, be mindful of what it is you're asking for. Does it fit within the context of the board business? Try to keep it strategic. Again, where does it fit in the scorecard? If we're not aligning ourselves with what it is we're telling everybody else or asking everybody else to align with, then we've already sort of proverbially shot ourselves in the foot. So on top of that, some of these things can take staff time. I mentioned last meeting that Dr. Micah and his staff are going to do their best to turn around a report or a request as quickly as they can. You need to go through the proper formats, either at a regular meeting or fill out the, what is it, BBE?
Yeah, there's actually not a form. It's just by sending an email to me triggers the BBE.
Correct.
The flow, correct.
But don't have the expectation, don't assume that it will get sent back to you within a matter of hours. If you need something for a particular meeting, try to be mindful and give them enough time to put the information together to send back. So same thing with reports and other things that we might want to put on an agenda or ask the district or ask for a presentation. I'll just say it again, just where does it fit on the scorecard? And just remember that as you're going through those things. And I think lastly, I've had several questions about Shack. Just so you all can understand where I am with that, knowing that we have 4 new board members. It's not being ignored, it's not being pushed aside. I don't want anybody to think that. I've gotten questions about whether or not we're in violation of state law. We are not. The ideal situation is that we could have the ability for all 7 of us to have another, I don't like having meetings to have meetings, but another discussion workshop with all of us so that the new members can ask questions, understand the purpose of SHAC, the makeup of SHAC, just ask questions about the different committees and understand how everything operates. In absence of that, I'm sure there's other ways we can provide that information to everybody, but the first thing we need to tackle are the bylaws and policies. There were some recommendations that came to us at one of the meetings, so those will be coming up for us to discuss as a board. In addition, we have membership, so that will potentially coincide. After that, the SHAC will have to do some work, but we do have 3 things I'm aware of that have been provided as recommendations to us that we will get to. None of them, from my understanding, are pressing to where they have to be done in the next month or so, just because there are already things for like curriculum that are happening in the district. So the early childhood development discussion that we had, we'll have to go through the Chase subcommittee or standing committee before it comes back to us. So that's, everybody's aware of that. The 8th grade human sexuality curriculum that this year, I think we heard at the last meeting, will be 7th grade again. The 8th graders will get the 7th grade because that's the notification that went out to the parents. So that's another, and then the last one, there was a recommendation from SHAC about the health curriculum for high school. So those 3 things will, I'm sorry, health requirement, not the curriculum. Health class requirement for the district. So I'm trying to get this to where we can make sure everybody's up to speed and understands the information that's being presented to them and understands the foundations of what it is that they're being asked to look at, So we're going to go through this methodically in the right amount of time and make sure that everybody has their questions answered, everybody's comfortable with what's happening, and we will get SHAC back up and running. So it's not all going to happen at one meeting. I don't think that's fair to any of us. I don't think that's fair to staff. I think we need to parse this out and make sure we do it in a logical fashion. So that's where we are, and we'll get out more information through Ms. Turner as we pick all those up, or as they end up on agendas and that type of thing. So anyway, that's all I had at this point. Any questions that would avoid discussion, detailed discussion? So just wanted to give you all a piece of where things are at this point. So other than that, item 4, adjournment, and the time is 7:40.